In this episode of the Looking into Wine podcast, we have the pleasure of interviewing Gus Zhu, Master of Wine, about his insightful new book, Behind the Glass. During our conversation, we delve into various compelling topics, shedding light on the art and science of wine tasting, while dispelling common misconceptions. Gus' expertise and perspective offer a fresh understanding of how we perceive and evaluate wine, making this a must listen for enthusiasts and professionals alike. As a valued listener of the Looking into Wine podcast, you can enjoy an exclusive 15% discount on Gus' new book using the promotional code in the episode description below. Now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to the Looking into Wine podcast. I'm Mattia Scarpazza, your host. Today's guest is a Master of Wine and a graduate in Enology and Viticulture from UC Davis. He works as a scientist in R&D for Cork Supply and Tonnellerie O. And he teaches wine courses on the side too. Having just released his first book, Behind the Glass, published by the Académie du Vin Library, is now an official author too. I welcome to the show, Gus Zhu.
Thank you, Mattia.
It's a pleasure to have you as a host, and I love the book. I really enjoyed
Thank
reading
you.
it. It's such a complex topic, and you managed to break it down and try to be very realistic about it all. And obviously, you have spent many years studying and putting like I guess this is like your work of many years coming together. How did you start this journey in sensory chemicals and tasting and your MW? How this all tied together?
Quite a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. So I majored in horticulture in my undergrad studies, and I attended a wine tasting class with a horticultural professor, Professor Hui Ma, and sort of got me into the wine world. And then I started to work for Dragon Phoenix with two current MWs, Feng Yi Walker MW and Edward Rack MW, and that got me into the wine world. But I've always been interested in the more academic and technical side of wine, and that's how I applied to UC Davis, and I got into the viticulture and enology program over there. And dur during my Davis time, I got really interested in two parts. One is the chemical part, the other is the sensory part. So I started to do more work on in those areas, especially for chemistry side. I co-published a paper with Dr. Andrew Waterhouse on the chemistry of color, red wine color, the wine pigments. And also I did my MW research paper on sensory, which is more about the play around with the acidity in wine and see the sensory outcome out of it. That's sort of the background of me in chemistry and in sensory.
Okay, amazing. And what about the book? How did you decide to start writing? Obviously, I have a lot of authors, and it's always as a guest, and I was interested to hear what was the epiphany moment when they decided I'm going to write a book. I got enough scrap paper around. I can put a book together or something. How was your journey to write a book?
So first of all, I'm not a writer. I'm not a wine writer. I adore and I enjoy reading all the great articles and books published by other people, but I never thought about writing a book. However, during my time teaching about wine and doing some research, lots of people ask me questions, and sometimes I answer them from the chemical perspective. But since I got into sensory world, I'm also like, there are lots of things that could be answered from the human perception as well, especially in terms of there are a lot of actually unknown uh,
Hmm.
phenomena in wine tasting. So I started to do research and I started to think about things and find out that we are at the very early stage of discovering our perception during wine tasting. So I'm like, okay, so how do I actually deliver the message to people in terms of what we know so far in the
Yeah,
scientific world for wine tasting and what we don't know, which I
yeah.
also mentioned in the book. I sort of try to put information down, and with the encouragement of my professors, including the chemistry professor I talked about, and also my sensory professor, Hildegard Heyman. I'm like, okay, maybe I can just put all the information together in a book, but that's over the work of like 5 years of not writing, but I actually thought a lot. For almost 3 years, I wrote something every day, but it's more about I think about how to put them together, and somehow I put them together.
And I think the book it reads very well, and it's very like for me it's interesting because it's very somewhat advanced, but at the same time is he really welcomed also for like I think it covers a breadth of topic that it can be enjoyed by very professional, high skilled from the beginners. Well, was that your intention since the beginning for the book? Was it something that you happy with that outcome?
Yeah, thank you. So I don't. I think it's kind of like my intention from the beginning, but I have to thank all the people around me who are either wine professionals or just wine consumers, because it's their question during daily life communication, during my wine teaching, that I receive those kind of questions. And I always think about how to answer them. It's people's communication that foster me to have all these kind of points I wrote down and put together as a book.
Yeah, amazing. So I selected a few points from the book because there's very many topics throughout the book, and it would be impossible to cover in the podcast. And obviously, I want to encourage everybody to go and read it. But there's a few things that I like to get pick your brain on. So. You talk a lot at the beginning of your book. You talk about the chemical terroir and sensory terroir. Um, Obviously, terroir is talks a lot. It's been talked a lot by winemakers and the sense of place and these sort of things, but never I connected to that sort of to the tasting itself. How do you come up with it, and what are those principles?
Yeah, because as I wrote in the book, that terroir actually encompasses almost everything you can think about that influence a bottle of wine. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking like wine tasting is similar way that if we think about the chemistry and the sensory, I can just say they are also a part of the terroir because this is what we ultimately perceive as an individual from the glass. That's
Mm-hmm.
one thought. The other thought is that also people, every one of us, at least in the wine industry, we are always trying to understand terroir. Like it's been the uh, like thousands of years of processing of understanding terroir. So as I mentioned, the science of wine tasting part is also people's exploration, and we are at the early stage. So I also want to propose this kind of concept to hopefully start to let people know that we are exploring it. So I hope by reading the book, you can see, oh, I may understand certain points on wine tasting, but it's more important for me as an individual, for you as an individual to explore whether it's a science or completely non-scientific part of tasting. Hopefully I kind of delivered that message in the book.
No, you did. There's a great. I think it's there throughout the book. So there is. You mentioned earlier about your. I think it was your thesis. So one of your paper then you wrote about the color, and
Yeah.
you talk a bit in the book about the color white, which is not a color. How does that work? What is the color white? I think that's a great news for me.
Yeah, so it's also to do with I think it's a discrepancy between uh what people study in terms of the chemistry and the physics of color
Mm,
versus what we always perceive every single second as we open our eyes of the world, right? So we see things and believe in the way color and information process in our brain. So I see that that is white, that is black, that is very clear to an individual.
yeah,
But as soon as you started to explore the physics and chemistry of color, you're talking about wavelengths of light, you're talking about our cones and rods in the eyes, the color receptors and everything. And again, there is a discrepancy there, right? In terms of if you think in the scientific way, it seems like, oh, the whole world started to change. And do I really see what I see? But ultimately, I sort of write about the sensory side, which is about what you see is what you see, right? Just
mm,
I told you the chemistry and the physics behind it, but you should respect what you actually see because I also mentioned there are variabilities among people. So what you see is red, but in the red and green, but in the eyes of colorblind, red-green colorblind people, they will see a different world.
mm.
And if they see it differently, it's different because it's genetic, and you should just take it as it is.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. I think like throughout the book, you sort of talk a lot about like the misconception. You challenge a bit the concept of the tastings and what people perceive and in the individuals, and I expect like doing also your MWs and your advanced studies, you must have seen the effect as well of this, like, oh, my perception is slightly different than another person. So I think that comes through a lot. There is another topic, and then I think is, I mean, I've been in the industry for like 11 years, and there is a word, there is this buzzword, and it's thrown around a lot, reduction. And there is a lot of it, and a lot of people, oh, this one is a bit reductive, the other one is a bit reductive. What is reduction for from your studies? How do you describe it? What do you make of it?
Okay, so I'll say something, but hopefully it can be like aired or it's not something that we can we cannot show over here. So first of all, chemistry is very straightforward, right? In
Yeah.
chemistry, there are more oxidative chemical compounds. There are more reductive uh, compounds in nature. And the chemical reactions is all about the more oxidative compound will oxidize the more reductive compound. Anyway, that's a boring chemistry side, right?
That's good.
But for the sensory side, it's so interesting in terms of nowadays people talk about the reductive aromas, which are associated with the reductive chemical compounds in wine. Now, some of those aromas, some people perceive it as very stinky. So people say it's a faulty wine because it's too reductive. But for certain wines, people say like certain white burgundies or certain champagne styles or certain Syrah, people say,
Yeah.
oh, it's a bit reductive, it's interesting, it's complex. And I found it interesting because that shows you how we evolved in nature and how we were programmed as human beings or other sorts of other animals or plants even, that we do need certain compounds,
Yeah.
right? But certain compounds in high concentrations, it can be toxic. That's why we perceive too so-called too much reductive notes as negative. But
Okay.
we do need a little bit of the reductiveness. And why is that? For example, one bigger group of reductive compounds are sulfides, the sulfur-containing compounds, right?
Yeah.
Certain sulfur-containing compounds, when it's very concentrated, it can poison you. But we also need them because certain reductive compounds, we is a kind of like a messenger in between like conducting cell to cell communications,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's even pheromones that contain either sulfur or nitrogen containing compounds. Again, those in high concentrations, people may perceive it as very stinky, but
Yeah.
some people may not admit their so-called fetish of smelling the tiny bit of those kind of compounds because we
Yeah.
need them. So I think it's all about we need all sorts of things in our life to help us evolve and grow as a, this is how our body program, but it
Yeah.
depends on the concentration. It depends on like how the whole chemical matrix put together.
Yeah, I feel like you're talking about evolution. I feel like there is for reduction, and there is like this. It's becoming such a buzzword, and it's evolving the way that a lot of winemakers are making their wine to sort of play on that sort of chemical component, because there is something that a lot of people are getting to appreciate a lot more, maybe than 20, 30 years ago. And I think it's very interesting to see how is evolving also the style of wine.
Yeah, hey, that's also a very interesting point because first of all, like if there's a market, right? But the other thing to think about related to that, maybe I'll incorporate in the second edition of my book, is that if you think about winemaking in the past, let's say 200 years ago,
Yeah.
it's mostly oxidative
Mm.
because people don't have control of oxidation,
Yeah.
right? And also for food and all sorts of drinks around people, many years ago, people may tend to make them in a more oxidative way because we don't have temperature control. We don't have the so-called inert vessels.
Yeah.
But nowadays, because we have these kind of more advanced winemaking technologies, we can actually make those kind of styles. Like as I mentioned in my book, the New Zealand typical Marlborough type of Sauvignon Blanc with those kind
Yeah.
of passion fruit, grapefruit notes, those are also associated with more reductive compounds, right? And
Yeah.
but why we can make this? Why we could not make this many years ago, but only recent decades? It is because of the advancement of winemaking technology that started to make these compounds. And these compounds, again, if in the right concentration, people love them because our body needs them and we like them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I mean it's a topic that I come up with a few times in on the podcast in other episodes, and this like evolution of wine, how it's changed in the last, I don't know, 70 years, from oxidative to this very clean, pristine, fruit forward,
Yeah.
and I think it's fascinating. I think for me, like one of the things I picked up on the book, it was about the myth of the region in Tang, that the front is bitter or whatever it was. I can't remember, but you go on and you disrupt that a bit. What how does our mouth feels the flavor of wine, and how does that work?
So it's mainly because still, even some textbooks to kindergarten children, they put the wrong information.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I have to write something about the misconception of the so-called map, the tongue of the map, the tongue map, right? That people used to perceive as incorrectly,
Mm.
which was, right? They say, oh, there's a tongue map. The front of the tongue is responsible for the sweet taste. The sides of the tongue are responsible for the acid taste, sour taste, whatever. Um, those are totally wrong because we have taste buds all over our mouth, and each taste bud will be able to perceive the basic 5 or 6 basic tastes, right? Sweet, sour, umami, salty, everything. So it's not about which area that is more responsible for which taste. So that's the incorrect part that people tend to perceive because the map show that way. Um, I also want to say write about this is because it's not only about those kind of wrong textbooks for kindergarten kids or school kids. It's also about I think it's ever since COVID, people starting to realize, and also nowadays the research on alcohol is bad for you, right? Those kind of research, people actually start to realize that even in the research world, even in the scientific world, some scientific papers, they can present some information which are correct because they are the objective data, but some people can, especially I have to say some media, bad media people, they use that data and interpret in the way that is incorrect, and that misleads the general public. We've seen tons of that during COVID times, right? Because there is a lack of comprehensive data at the early stage. So whenever they have some data, which does data, they are neutral, right? There's no right or wrong. But as soon as some people use certain data to interpret certain things, information, they can interpret it very wrong, in a very wrong way. Right. So, and also, like now the alcohol is bad for you. I'm like, if you do research on any of certain compounds you eat, you grab certain, let's say, potato chips or Coca-Cola or anything in the supermarket, and you study certain compounds, you can always find them toxic, right? So it's about people do not nowadays, and also AI really make it worse because people just grab that information and think it's true without critical thinking. And that is why I want to demystify the town map to show to people, hey, even when you read my book, you need to think, this is the information, but how do I interpret it in a correct way?
I mean, it's interesting. Like, I can see the scientist coming from you, because you're looking for like empirical and unbiased, or the least biased outcome. And I agree that a lot of like these like hardcore is bad for you, but I mean. And also, I mean, I'm just gonna say it out loud, but it's like I feel like a lot of the media in our world, in the wine world, were not really giving us any help by continuing talking about like less wines consume, alcohol is bad, and like there is a lot of miscommunication, I think, out there,
Yeah.
or things
If
are
you
blown out of proportion, I think, because of the headlines, maybe.
if you eat KFC and McDonald's every day, it's even worse. And if you just if you know, like even if you eat cheese, right? Cheese has lots of salt, and it's really bad for your heart. So it's like anything can be toxic.
Exactly, anything. So what, let's move swiftly over another topic. I think you talk a bit in the sensory part of your book, because it's divided by visual, sensory, and then some of the putting all together. In the sensory part, you talk a lot about like the interaction between pH and acidity, and how these affect the wine. So, like high pH and low acidity, how those, like in lemon terms, how those two compounds, how those two elements get together? Because like I notice, I'm based in Europe, and we talk a lot about like acidity levels,
Yeah.
probably because of German influence. They talk about like high level of acidity, whereas in the States there is more like talk about the pH levels. So it's a bit they don't really get, none of them get together, but like the two together, they oftentimes they don't get talk together. So
Yeah.
I feel,
So in the book, it's a bit complicated topic, and I spent lots of time writing about
yeah,
that part for the acidity. For the chemistry part, it is indeed a bit complex, but I explained in the book
yeah,
that there are certain concepts relating to total acidity and the pH and all these kind of concepts. And if you put certain things together, if you just look at the number, that will indicate sort of two sensory perception aspects. One is that, for example, the pH, right? Uh, just the pH at the beginning as you put the wine in your mouth, If the pH is low enough, and that means like the proton, the hydrogen ion concentration is very high, so that you do perceive it as very sour. But there's another concept called pKa, which I won't explain in this podcast. But if you play around with the pH and pKa and all these kind of this kind of chemistry data, as they hit certain points, right, they could make the wine's acidic taste last very long. But now I only just talk about the chemistry side. The sensory side, actually, I didn't write that much about it because it's so complex. Because if you when you mention German wines, right? Let's say German Rieslings, whether it's sweet or dry, it's not just about the so-called acidity we perceive is actually not the acidity we perceive on its own. It's actually there are other factors such as alcohol, sugar, and aroma compounds, all sorts of other compounds that can change the perceived acidity. So in my book, just like what I said about scientific world, I could only put down the scientific research on acid perception in pure water or in pure alcohol solutions.
Yeah.
But if we relate that acid perception to real wine, I just think there's no way to do that kind of research nowadays unless you just do a direct sensory study in terms of letting people describe and rate their acid perception.
Yeah.
But exactly how the chemistry contribute to that kind of acid perception, there's just no way to predict.
I mean, I'm not gonna open another can of worm talking about minerality and the perception, but I feel like before I have a last couple of questions. I have another couple of questions for you. But so, what was for you your biggest discovery while you were writing your book? What was your something you didn't know about, and I was like, oh, that's super interesting. I wish I knew before.
Probably because of my work in these fields in the past. So, and I teach a lot. So I'm like, okay, there's nothing that I found. Oh, I discovered something new.
Yeah.
It is more about I discover that we really are at the embryonic, at the very early stage of discovering these things. And my biggest finding is actually for myself in terms of, like I wrote in the last part of my book, when I drink wine, I don't care about the chemistry and the scientific things behind. If it's somebody just like if it's in the, let's say in a class or in a presentation that people like in this podcast, I love to talk about these things. Like I love to talk about these things at the dinner table. But when I actually drink a wine, right, just I don't think about those things because I just want to enjoy more about at that moment. If I appreciate the wine, and at that moment, if I appreciate the conversation around the glass of wine we are sharing, whether the conversation is about scientific or is about any other things.
No, I mean, I guess also throughout with your master wine studies, you must have spent many years of dissecting every single wine then you tasted for many years. So you get to a point where you're like, yeah, I want to enjoy this, and there's the emotion about it. I mean, in the end of the day, still like wine is a convivial, is a gratuitous thing. You is best enjoyed shared with some other people. So yeah, I think it's a great way to sort of finish our podcast because I feel like we cover quite a lot of topics, and obviously you have a lot of more topics in the book. Is anything you like to add or anywhere people can connect with you? Is any preferred media people could connect with you? Anything you wanted to add before I let you continue with your day?
Yeah, so like if people want to contact me, I have my website, gusju.com. You can contact me by email. I'm very good at emails. I'm not good at like a voice call. uh, I'm good at like really seeing people, like even through camera, talking to people,
Yeah,
or like communication by emails. But one thing I'd like to add on the book itself is that again, it's the sensory side. I really hope people start to appreciate more on how different we are in terms of enjoying things. So especially like it's almost holiday season, right? Now
yeah,
here in the US, it's almost Thanksgiving time. So when you're actually sharing food and drinks and conversations with people, be mindful of the individual variabilities. Is that you cannot just thinking, oh, I like this turkey, everybody likes this turkey. Not really. But if you don't enjoy it, then you don't enjoy it. It's fine, okay? And
yeah.
for wine, it's the same. Over Christmas, don't overthink like what wine pairs well with what food. It's about if you want to get a wine or try a wine, you just get it and try it. And if you enjoy it, that's perfect.
Amazing. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I had my fair share of time on the floor selling wine and everything, and ultimately it's what people enjoy drinking, and it's and I feel like wine is something that people can experiment, try many styles and everything. Although some people they
Yeah.
obnoxiously say, "Oh
And,
no, I shouldn't done it." I don't like
exactly.
something.
A-
Yeah,
And I will also want to say the chemistry side of wine is actually very interesting, very fun. Just like we talk about, right? The reductive compounds, it could be very stinky, and you find somebody saying, "Oh, why somebody likes to smell certain socks?" and it's like I don't blame them because like some people they do need to smell certain things to make them feel happy because those compounds in those kind of socks in low concentration is actually complex.
yeah, it does. Exactly. It's like we just open a can of tennis balls or something. Some people
Oh,
love them.
tennis balls, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Gus, thank you so much for your
Thank you,
time.
Mattia.
It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and I wish you all the success with your book. And if there's
Thank
another
you.
edition down the line, and with your work, and I'm sure you do some more experimental throughout your career about sensory science. And
And more importantly, give me feedback. And the more feedback back I got, the more feedback, the more I can think about in terms of doing some research and put information together and to share with people.
thank you. You have listened to the Looking into Wine podcast with Gus Zhu, Master of Wine, on his recent book, Behind the Glass. If you want to treat yourself to a copy of the book, I remind you that we have a discount code. Just find it below here in the show description. You can find Looking into Wine wherever you listen to your podcast and on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you soon.